Greetings, I'm the man behind the mask, and I'd like to talk to you about hockey. Yes, let's talk about hockey, the show that journeys through the history of the sport of ice hockey from its disputed origins to the game we see today. Now, even though the Atlanta Thrashers Club has now been filed away into the history books amongst the teams that never went anywhere in the NHL, they still lasted for 11 seasons before leaving Atlanta. However, there have been teams that were so bad that they only lasted for one solitary season in the NHL.
The first of these unfortunate teams was the Philadelphia Quakers. When the Pittsburgh Pirates, the third American-based NHL team, fell on hard times both on the ice and at the box office in the late 1920s, the club's owners secretly sold the team to the bootlegger Bill Dwyer, who used ex-boxer Benny Leonard as the frontman to appear as the team's real owner, since Dwyer already owned the New York Americans team. This sale, however, did not help the cause. With the stock market crash of 1929 followed by the Great Depression, the owners found themselves having to sell off their star players to make ends meet. By the end of the 1929-30 season, the team was $400,000 in debt, and their arena, the Duquesne Gardens, was not suitable for an NHL team. Therefore, Leonard requested permission to temporarily move the club to Philadelphia until a new arena was built in Pittsburgh. Once in Philadelphia, the team went with the name of the Quakers for the 1930-31 season, in recognition of the historical importance of the Quaker religious community in both the founding of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. Things got no better after the move, though. The financial troubles continued unabated off the ice, and on the ice, the Quakers were the definition of futility. It took the team 3 games to score a goal, and 3 more to get its first win, when they beat the visiting Toronto Maple Leafs 2-1 on November 25, 1930.
By season's end, they finished with a horrendous 4-36-4 record. Additionally, their .136 winning percentage was the lowest in NHL history, a record that would stand for 45 years until the Washington Capitals finished with a .131 winning percentage in the 1974-75 season. The 4 wins also tied the 1919-1920 Quebec Bulldogs for the fewest wins in NHL history for a team that played a full season. So, at the end of that season, the Quakers announced that they would not field a team for the 1931-32 season.
Though the franchise wasn't completely canceled altogether, at each of the next 5 season-opening NHL governors' meetings, they announced that they were suspending operations for that season. It would not be until May 7, 1936, that they would officially end the franchise, when it was clear that a new arena in Pittsburgh was no longer in the cards. 3 years after the Quakers' ill-fated season, the next short-lived team would crop up. For the better part of their tenure in Ottawa, the Senators played in the smallest market in the NHL, with the 1931 census listing only 110,000 people in the city, which was the league's second smallest market. The team started having attendance problems when the NHL expanded to the United States in 1924, as games against the new American teams did not draw well. Despite winning what would be its last Stanley Cup in 1927, the team lost $50,000 for the season, and after suspending operations for the 1931-32 season in order to help eliminate the debt, the Senators returned for the 1932-33 season only to finish in last place for the next 2 seasons. After their second straight season finishing in dead last, the the Senators' owners announced that the team would be moving elsewhere for the next season due to losses of $60,000 over the previous 2 seasons, also stating that they needed to move the Senators to a larger city in order to protect the shareholders and pay off their debts. And so the Senators landed in St. Louis, Missouri in May of 1934, where they were renamed the Eagles, inspired by the logo of the Anheuser-Busch Brewing Company, which was founded in St. Louis. At the time, St. Louis was the 7th largest city in the United States, with over 800,000 inhabitants, over 7 times larger than Ottawa. Despite this, St. Louis had been denied an NHL franchise in 1932 because travel to the Midwest was considered too expensive during the Great Depression.
Even before the official debut of the Eagles, a problem had arisen for the new NHL club, as there was already a professional hockey team in the city playing in the American Hockey Association known as the St. Louis Flyers. The owners of the Flyers claimed that they had an agreement with the NHL, which prevented it from settling west of the Mississippi. They then threatened to sue for $200,000 in compensation as soon as the Eagles played their first game. However, following a visit from the AHA president, the Flyers were asked not to go forward with the lawsuit, and as such did not pursue further legal action, and eventually changed home venues.
In defiance of all geographic reality, the Eagles retained the Senators' place in the Canadian Division, alongside Toronto, the Montreal Canadiens, the Montreal Maroons, and the New York Americans for the 1934-35 season. In their first game, the Eagles succumbed to a late rally by the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Chicago Blackhawks, losing 3-1. However, they would register their first victory in the next game, winning 4-2 over the New York Rangers. Following that win, the Eagles went on an 8-game losing streak, and after the first 13 games of the season, they had posted a 2-11-0 record, placing them last in their division. With this dismal performance, head coach Eddie Girard resigned and was replaced by George "Buck" Boucher, the coach that Girard himself had replaced after the franchise's last season in Ottawa. Under Boucher's coaching, the team showed improvement, posting a 3-3-3 record in the first 9 games. However, the early losing streak had already managed to damage the fan base. In early January of 1935, the team cut ticket prices to the lowest in the league in an attempt to bring out fans. But that tactic failed, and by February the financial state of the team forced the Eagles to essentially sell their captain and leading goal scorer Sid Howe to the Detroit Red Wings. Unable to maintain the early success under Boucher, the Eagles finished last in the Canadian Division with a record of 11-31-6, and with only 84 goals scored, they were the lowest scoring team in the league.
By season's end, the Eagles' ownership had lost $70,000, due primarily to the cost of train travel, since they had to make a large number of trips to Montreal and Toronto due to being in the Canadian Division. An attempt to stabilize the franchise by selling off its players netted $58,000, and the owners had hoped to move once more to save the franchise. While there was interest from Cleveland and also in a return to Ottawa, neither would come to fruition.
As a result, the ownership again petitioned the NHL to allow them to suspend operations for a year. However, this time, the NHL refused, and consequently the Eagles were put up for sale. After no credible offer surfaced, the NHL itself bought the franchise and player contracts for $40,000, and then distributed the players around the league through a dispersal draft. And so, like Philadelphia before them, the NHL left St. Louis and would not return until its great expansion in 1967. Now, aside from the Quakers and Eagles, you could make the argument that the 1917-1918 Montreal Wanderers, the 1919-1920 Quebec Bulldogs, and the 1941-42 Brooklyn Americans were one-year blunders in the NHL as well. However, the Wanderers only shut down because their home arena burnt to the ground. Additionally, they also were a longtime member of the NHL's predecessor, the NHA, winning the league's first Stanley Cup title in 1910, as well as 6 additional Stanley Cup challenges while a member of the ECAHA before that. Similarly, the Quebec Bulldogs also had a long history with the NHA, winning Stanley Cup titles in 1912 and 1913, and the club was not a member of the NHL's first 2 seasons simply due to the franchise suspending operations because of financial difficulties. The Brooklyn Americans, on the other hand, was just the reworked name of the New York Americans club that had been a member of the NHL for 16 years prior to the name change. While the NHL would in later years see more short-lived franchises come and go, none would be as short and disastrous as the Philadelphia Quakers and the St. Louis Eagles of the 1930s.